Jonah Pike knelt in the washrack pit at Cottonwood Station, driving the last spoke home with the flat of his palm, because a mallet left marks and marks meant a man had rushed. Above him, the coach body hung in slings. Dust drifted through the plank gaps and settled on his forearms. He turned the wheel, watched the fellows ride true against his thumb, and felt the small, clean satisfaction of a thing balanced. Nobody watched. Nobody ever did. That suited him. He worked alone, ate alone, slept in the harness room, and had told himself for 6 years that this was not loneliness, but economy. Silas Wren, the station master, leaned over the pit rail with a paper folded in his coat. "That's the 4th wheel this month you've done past what the company pays for. It'll hold to Yuma now. Nobody's going to see it and thank you, Jonah." Doesn't need thanking, needs doing right. Silas was quiet a moment. He was 61, with a bad shoulder from an overturn in 68, and he had a way of saying hard things gently. A man can do everything right by himself and still be no use to anybody. You ever think on that? Work's not the same as being counted on. Being counted on means somebody's got to know your name and be able to find you. Jonah wiped the draw knife on his trousers. "Then they can find me here." "That," said Silas, "is what I came down to talk about." The paper in Silas's coat was a notice from the Southern Overland Company, dated 11 days earlier in Tucson, announcing that Cottonwood Station and its stock, buildings, and water rights had been sold to a cattle concern, effective the 1st of October, 22 days off. Jonah read it twice, standing in the sun, then handed it back. They keeping anyone? The well, not the shop. That was the whole conversation, which was how Cottonwood had always done things. But Jonah spent the rest of the afternoon walking the yard the way a man walks a house he is about to lose, seeing everything at once. The shop was 3 walls of adobe and 1 of plank, with a forge Silas had built in 65, and a tire-setting platform. Jonah had leveled himself with a water trough and a straight edge. The spokestock, hickory seasoned 4 years, stood in the rafters where the air moved. Jonah could look at a wheel and tell you which shop in the territory had built it, because the fellow joints told on the maker. Bell's shop in Maricopa doweled them. The company shop in Tucson used a butt joint and trusted the tire. He knew the road too. He had ridden the box as a swamper on the Yuma run for 2 seasons before his hands got good enough to keep him at the station, and he could still name the stops in order from Cottonwood west: Sandy Wells, Agua Fria, Burnt Rock, the Tinajas, Gila Bend, and tell you which of them had water in September and which had a rock tank that went dry by August. He had a tool roll, canvas, 12 pockets, oiled, draw knife, spoke shave, brace and 4 bits, 2 chisels, a rasp, a marking gauge, a leather punch, a curved awl, waxed linen thread on a card, and a small pair of tongs he had made himself when he was 19 and had not yet learned that showing off in iron leaves you with a tool that is prettier than it is useful. He also had a canteen, a blanket, $41 in a coffee tin, and no family that would answer a letter. His mother had died in Missouri when he was 11. His father had put him on a freight wagon with a note pinned to his coat and had not come back. Jonah had learned, somewhere on that wagon, a thing he never said aloud and did not know he believed: that if you needed a person, they became a way to be hurt, and if you needed no one, you could not be left. Silas knew some of it, not from being told. "Territorial capitals at Prescott," Silas said that night over beans. "Depot, there's the biggest north of Tucson. You've got a hand for wheels and a name I can write on a letter. That's a long walk. It's a long walk if you go around by the road. It's 4 days if you cut the pass." Silas set his cup down. "I'm not saying cut the pass." "You just said it." "I said what it is. Wind River Pass takes 11 miles off the Burnt Rock detour, and it kills people. Sandstone walls, a floor 40 feet wide in places, and every storm from here to the Mogollon drains through it. Flash flood in 71 took a freight outfit. Water came down with no cloud in sight over the pass at all. It's September. It's September, and we've had rain in the high country 3 nights running." Silas rubbed his shoulder. "You go. You go in the morning, you get through in daylight, and you don't camp on the floor. You camp up on a bench, and you keep your eyes on the sand for old high-water lines. You've been through it. Twice. Once with a hearse, and once with a bad conscience. Silas smiled with half his mouth. There's another thing. There's talk of the pass. A mail convoy went into it 2-3 years back. 5 coaches, express and mail out of Yuma. Never came out. Company posted a loss. The territorial office posted notices, and everybody agreed the water took it. Everybody agreed. Everybody agreed real fast, said Silas. That's the part I never liked. Jonah left Cottonwood on the 28th of September with the tool roll across his back, the canteen full, and Silas's letter to a man named Dortch at the Prescott Depot buttoned into his shirt. He made Sandy Wells the first night and the mouth of Wind River Pass by noon on the 3rd day. The walls came up red and close. The floor was sand, combed into long ridges by water that had run and gone. He climbed a bench 40 feet up to eat, because Silas had told him to, and from up there, looking down the length of the pass with the light coming in sideways, he saw them. Coaches. Not one. A line of them, scattered a quarter mile along the north wall, where a bend had piled the debris. 2 lay on their sides, half swallowed in sand. One had gone into a boulder hard enough to fold the front boot. Another sat almost upright with its wheels splayed and its top stripped down to the bows, and the 5th was only a shape under a drift, with a hub standing out of it like a knuckle. Jonah stood a long time. Then he went down. The sand was loose and hot. He walked the wrecks in order, the way he would have walked a yard, and what he saw stopped him in a way the wrecks alone had not. The tires were sound. The spokes were sound. 4 of the 5 had come to rest on wheels that were still true. Water does not sort a convoy. Water does not spare the wheels. He gave himself the rest of that day to be wrong. He wanted to be wrong. Being wrong meant he could fill his canteen at the seep he'd spotted in the bend, sleep on the bench, and walk out north in the morning toward a depot job and a bunk and 11 years of steady work. So he tested it the only way he knew, which was slowly and with his hands. The first coach, the one folded against the boulder, told him nothing useful. The front axle had broken at the shoulder, a clean transverse break, the kind that comes from a hard impact, and he could have gotten that from a flood. The second one changed his mind. It lay on its side with the near wheels up. He got the rear one turning, and it turned. The tire was tight on the felloes. Iron shrinks onto wood and holds until the wood dries and shrinks further, and 3 years in that sand should have left the tires loose enough to rattle. These had been reset recently before the wreck. Somebody had spent money on these coaches within a season of them dying. He crawled into the body through the door well, which was now the ceiling. The interior stank of old leather and mouse. Mail sacks had burst and turned to gray paste. There were trunks smashed open and picked over, a woman's shoe, a broken lamp, nothing anyone would come back for. But the seats were wrong. He knew coach seats. He had recovered them at Cottonwood, horsehair over a webbed frame, muslin, then leather, tacked underneath with a hidden row and a welt to cover it. These had been done in leather over something that did not give like horsehair, and the tacking underneath was double-rowed and stitched besides. Waxed linen in a saddler's lock stitch, close and even. Nobody stitches a coach seat. Tacks are cheaper, and a stitch takes an hour. He sat back on his heels in the dark of that overturned body, and understood that if he cut one seat open, he would not be able to unknow what was inside it. He climbed out instead. He went up to the bench and ate half a strip of jerky and watched the light go long. He thought about the depot at Prescott, about a wage of $2.50 a day and a man named Dortch who did not know him yet and could be made to like him with 3 months of good work. He thought about how easy it would be to have simply not climbed the bench, to have walked the pass floor with his eyes on his boots and gone by. And he thought, without wanting to, about Silas saying, "Everybody agreed, real fast," and about the fact that a mail convoy carries other people's money and other people's proofs, pension certificates, land grants, the papers that decide whether a widow eats. There was a difference, he told himself, between knowing a wrong thing had happened and being the man who had to fix it. He was one man with $41, no horse, no standing, and no witness. He was not the law. He had never in his life been the person anyone came to. That last thought sat in him badly, and he did not examine why. In the morning he went down to leave, and he stopped at the third coach because it was on his way, and because he had already decided that looking was not the same as choosing. This one was the express coach. He could tell by the boot construction and by the iron strapping on the rear box. The box had been forced, the hasp was bent outward, and the lid was up. That was ordinary. Anyone would rob a strong box. What was not ordinary was the driver's footwell, where the floorboard had been lifted and put back down with new screws. Jonah looked at the screw heads for a long while. New screws in a floorboard, out here, 3 years in the weather, and the slots still bright at the bottom. Somebody had opened this coach after the wreck, taken what was in the box, and had not found what was in the seats, which meant somebody knew there was a convoy here and had come to it deliberately, which meant when they finished figuring out that they had missed something, they would come back. He drank from the canteen and screwed the cap on and found that his hands were steady, which surprised him. He had not decided anything. He simply took the awl out of the roll. The seat in the express coach came apart under the curved awl in about 4 minutes, once he found the run of the stitch and picked the lock loop at the corner. The leather peeled back off a layer of oiled canvas. Under the canvas, laid flat and sewn into pockets between the frame slats, were papers. He drew one out with 2 fingers. A pension certificate, Bureau of Pensions, invalid class, made out to a name he could not read in that light. Behind it, a folded bank draft on the Territorial Bank of Arizona. Behind that, a land patent with a red seal and a surveyor's plat drawn on the back. He counted the pockets in that one seat. 9. There were 4 seats in the coach and 5 coaches in the pass. Jonah sat in the wreck with a dead man's certificate in his hand and did the arithmetic of his own life. Prescott was 4 days north. Cottonwood was 3 days back. He had a day and a half of water in a canteen made for a day, 1 seep of uncertain flow, no wagon, no animal, and no way to carry paper out of a desert without it cooking to powder or blowing to Sonora. He put the certificate in his shirt. Then he went to find the express clerk. He found her instead, on the second morning, watering 2 mules at the seep, a woman of about 40 in a man's coat, with a canvas-topped wagon drawn up in the shade of the bend, and a rifle leaned where she could reach it, and he could see it. "That's my water," she said. "It's nobody's water. It is until somebody says different." She looked at the tool roll, and at the wrecks, and back at him. "Marisol Ortega. I haul freight to the Bradshaw camps, and I don't want trouble." "You know what's down there?" "I know there's coaches down there, and I know I've never once mentioned it in a town." She said it flatly, and he understood it was a warning, and also, in its way, an offer. 3 years I've watered here. I mind my own." "Somebody's coming back for them." Marisol looked at him a long moment, then she looked at the pass, at the 11 miles it saved her on every run to the camps, and Jonah saw the calculation move behind her face. "Then I'd like to know when," she said. The express clerk was in the second coach, under the drift, and Jonah did not disturb him beyond what was needed. He worked with his hat off. The man had gone down between the seats when the coach rolled, and the sand had done the rest, and 3 years in that dryness had left less than Jonah had braced for. In the inside breast of the coat there was an oilcloth wallet, and in the wallet a notebook the size of a hand, swollen and stiff. He carried it up to the bench and let it lie in the shade an hour before he tried the pages, because paper that dry tears if you hurry it, and he had learned patience on wood that split when he forced it. Marisol came up with a canteen and a piece of cold tortilla and sat on a rock 10 feet off, which was as close as she was prepared to come. Reading? Trying not to. The pages came apart in 3s and 4s. The clerk's name was H. Beale, and he had a clerk's hand, small and level, and he had kept two kinds of entries. The front of the book was way-bill work, sack counts, seals, receipt numbers, the ordinary bookkeeping of a man who moved other people's property and expected to answer for it. The back of the book was different. The back was dated entries in the same hand but written faster, and they began about 5 weeks before the convoy left Yuma. Aug. 2. Third time this month, the Prescott office has directed a reroute on registered matter. Instruction comes by wire, signed for the Register of the Land Office. No reason given. Not our practice. Aug. 9. Asked Cobb why registered matter for the northern counties travels the southern road. Told it is a matter of security. Did not care for how I was told. Aug. 21. Counted the seals myself. 2 registered pouches for Prescott were opened and resealed. Wax is right. Cord is wrong. Ours is hemp, and this is cotton. Jonah read that one 3 times. What? Said Marisol. He caught them by the string. Who's them? Not sure yet. He turned the page carefully at the gutter, but he was the kind of man who noticed the wrong string. Beale's entries got shorter and worse. Sept. 1. I have taken the papers out of the pouches and put them where they will not be found by a man opening a pouch. If I am wrong about this, I will be dismissed and deserve it. If I am right, I will be dismissed and worse. Sept. 4. Cobb has assigned the convoy the Wind River Road, 5 coaches together, which we have never done, on a road we do not use in the storm season. He says it is faster. It is faster the way a cliff is faster. The last entry was 3 words and a date. Sept. 9. Ropes. Jonah closed the book and sat with his forearms on his knees. He hid them himself, he said. The clerk, he sewed them into the seats before they left Yuma, because he knew the pouches were going to be opened. Then somebody put the convoy in here in a storm month and came back after and broke the strong box and took the cash and went home satisfied. And missed the seats. They missed the seats because he did it right. Double row of tacks and a lock stitch, so it looks like a factory job and not a repair. Jonah found he had to stop for a second. He spent his last week in Yuma stitching upholstery in the dark, so somebody in Prescott would get their land. Marisol was quiet. Ropes, she said finally. What's ropes? I don't know yet. He found out that afternoon, at the 4th coach, where the near side singletree had been cut and not broken, and where a length of hemp was still bound to the rear axle, frayed off short at about 8 feet, with the fray cut square at the end. Nobody cuts a rope square by accident. They had roped the coaches and pulled them off the road. That changed the arithmetic again, and Jonah spent the evening making a list on the back of a waybill with a carpenter's pencil, because a list was a thing he could hold. The problem, stated plainly, there were 5 coaches. He had opened 1 seat. If the clerk had loaded every seat, that was 20 seats, and if 9 pockets was the average, something near 180 documents. Each one belonged to a person. Each one had to be identified, kept flat, kept dry, and delivered to a place where it would be honored rather than quietly burned. The obvious answer was to carry them to Prescott and hand them to the territorial office. The obvious answer did not work, because the territorial office was where the instructions had come from. The second answer was the federal side. The land office had a register and a receiver, and the pension papers came out of a federal bureau, and there was a U.S. Marshal's office in Prescott. But Jonah did not know which men in those rooms were clean, and he had learned enough in 4 days to be certain that walking into a building and asking would get the papers taken from him by somebody polite. The third answer was the one Marisol supplied on the second night, without meaning to. Half of these people are still alive, she said. That's what you keep forgetting. You keep saying papers. They're 3 years gone. They'd have filed for replacements. With what? A pension certificate you replace by writing the bureau and waiting a year and proving you're you. A land patent, you go argue with the same office that lost it. She poked the fire. My brother-in-law waited 2 years on a survey, and it wasn't even stolen. He just got told the file went to Washington. Jonah looked at her across the fire. You're saying the owners are the proof. I'm saying if 100 people all show up at once, saying this was sewn into a seat in Wind River Pass. That's harder to burn than a bundle. He did not sleep much that night. In the morning he started the real work, and the real work was slower and duller than either of them expected. The seats did not come apart the same way twice. The first one had been easy because the express coach had sat upright in shade and the leather still had oil in it. The seats in the two overturned coaches had baked. When he tried to peel one, the leather cracked across the grain and took the canvas with it, and he tore 3 documents at the fold before he stopped and swore and sat down. The adjustment took him a day and a half. He could not soften the leather without water, and he could not spare water. But he could go around it. Instead of peeling the cover, he cut the frame. The seat bottoms were pine slats mortised into a rail, and if he took the rail out with a chisel, working from underneath, where the wood had been in shade, the whole pocketed panel came free as a unit, with the papers still flat between canvas and slat. Then he could carry the panel up to the bench and open it in the cool of the morning, when the leather had taken up a little night damp, and would bend instead of crack. It cost him 2 hours per seat instead of 20 minutes, and it used his chisels hard on wood full of blown sand, and by the 4th panel he had rolled the edge on the wide chisel and had to sharpen it on a flat stone from the wash with water he could not really spare. But it worked, and it kept working, and by the end of the 3rd day he had 11 panels stacked on the bench under Marisol's spare tarpaulin, and a growing sense of a thing he had no word for. He was not alone with it anymore. That was the part that kept catching him wrong-footed. Every time he came up the slope she was there, and she asked him what he'd found, and he told her. They set up a system on the 4th day, because Jonah's list had become a problem of its own. Marisol's wagon had a false floor, legitimate, she said, for keeping flour off the bed when it rained, and Jonah did not ask further. It was 8 feet by 4 and about 4 inches deep, and it was the only flat, dark, dry space within 40 miles. Papers go flat or they go nowhere, Jonah said. Fold them again and again, and they break at the crease, especially the seals. That red wax is brittle now, and if it cracks off, the document's worth less to anyone who wants a reason to doubt it. So we don't fold. We don't fold, and we don't stack them wet, and we don't let them get above what your hand can stand. They worked in the mornings and the late afternoons, and lay flat in shade in the middle of the day, and it took 11 days to strip 19 of the 20 seats. The 20th was under the boulder-folded coach in a way that would have required moving 3 tons of coach body, and Jonah left it and marked the place, which cost him a night of sleep. The counting was the slow part. Marisol could read and write English and Spanish both, and she had a freighter's habit of manifests, and she was better at it than he was. They got 162 documents, 61 pension certificates, most of them invalid class, most of them for men who had served in the war and been mustered out with something wrong with them, 38 bank drafts ranging from $11 to $400. 44 land patents and land office receipts, and 19 assorted vouchers on the territorial treasury for freight, forage, and construction. Marisol wrote the manifest in a ledger she used for hauling: name, kind of paper, county, amount if any, and which coach and which seat it came out of. Jonah added a column of his own, which she thought was foolish for 2 days and then did not. The column was condition. Torn at fold, water stain lower left, seal intact, seal cracked, fragments retained in envelope 14. Because if we hand a man a torn paper, Jonah said, and there's no record it came to us torn, then we tore it. You think like somebody who's been blamed for things. I think like somebody who repairs things other people are going to ride on. There were small victories in those 11 days, and Jonah, who had never in his life had anyone to have a victory in front of, found them nearly unbearable. On the 6th day, a pension certificate came out of the canvas with the name Eulalia Sanborn, Widow, Yavapai County. On it, and Marisol said, I know that road. There's a Sanborn place above Kirkland with a woman running it. She said it and went back to writing, and Jonah sat with the paper in his hands for a full minute. On the 8th day, the seep slowed to a trickle, and they spent an afternoon digging it back and cribbing the hole with flat rock, and it came up cool and steady after, and that night they drank as much as they wanted, which they had not done in a week. On the 9th day, Marisol taught him to hitch and drive the mules, badly, and laughed at him without meanness, and he discovered that he did not mind being laughed at by her. On the 10th day, he found the 6th coach. It was not in the line. It was a quarter-mile further up the pass, on the south side, wedged nose down into a slot where the wall had undercut, and it was not a mail coach at all. It was a light spring wagon, and it had a tool chest in it, and in the tool chest were 3 coils of hemp rope, a heavy snatch block, and a set of new-cut chain hooks. It was the outfit that had pulled the convoy off the road. They had lost it going out. Jonah stood looking at it a long time. That's their rigging, Marisol said. That's their rigging, and it's still here, which means they still want it. The spring wagon gave him more than rope. It gave him a name. Under the tool chest, jammed in the wagon bed and gone hard as a board, was a canvas nosebag with a freight tag wired to it. The tag was stenciled, Ormsby & Co., Forage and Teams, Prescott, and hand-numbered 4. Ormsby, Marisol said, and something in her voice made him look up. You know it. Everybody who hauls in the Bradshaws knows it. They contract teams to the territorial offices. Half the government freight north of the Salt goes on Ormsby stock. She turned the tag over. It's a real company, doing a real business. That's what makes it useful to somebody. Jonah took the tag and put it with the manifest, and then he took the rope and the snatch block and the hooks and carried all of it, 3 trips, up onto the bench and buried it under a slab of sandstone in a crack he had to widen with a chisel. Why? Marisol asked. Because when they come back for the convoy, they'll come to burn it or bury it, and either one needs pulling gear. They lost this outfit. If they're smart, they'll bring more. If they're in a hurry, they'll count on it being here. And if they bring their own anyway? Then I've lost nothing but an afternoon. That evening, they had the argument they had been circling for a week. Marisol wanted to load and go. The wagon was there, the mules were fed, the manifest was written, and 11 miles up the north road was open country where a person could be seen by other people, which was safety of a kind. Jonah wanted the 20th seat. It's under 3 tons of coach. There are maybe 8 documents in it. There are 162 out here. Marisol's voice stayed level. Which he was learning was how she got angry. You want to spend 4 days, and both my mules on 8. If it were your name in that seat. Don't, she said it hard. Don't do that. My name's not in it. Neither is yours. You want to talk about what we owe strangers, fine, but don't hand me the one about how it could be me, because I've been the person nobody came for, and I didn't need anybody to go. Feel. I needed a wagon. They sat with that. You've got to run, Jonah said. To the camps. You're late. 9 days late. They'll dock you. They'll dock me, and they'll give the route to Herrera, and next quarter I'll be hauling lumber for less. She poked the fire, which was how she got through things. So yes, I've got a cost. I'd like it counted like you count everything else. He looked at her, and he had the strong urge to say, then go with, because that was the move he had made his entire life, to make himself the one who needed nothing, so that no one could leave him with a debt. He did not say it. 2 days, he said. I'll try the coach for 2 days with what I've got. If it doesn't move, I mark the place, we load, and we go. And your loss goes in the ledger like everything else, and when this is done, somebody pays it. Nobody's going to pay it, then I will. With what? $41 and 6 years of wheel work, said Jonah. It'll take a while. She laughed at that, short and surprised, and the argument was over. He did not move the coach. He got it up 8 inches with a lever and a rock fulcrum and a cribbing stack of sandstone slabs, working alone through the middle of 2 days with his shirt off and his hat on. And on the second afternoon the crib shifted, and the body came down and took the levering pole with it, and would have taken his forearm if he had been 6 inches slower. He sat in the sand for a while with his heart going. Then he stood up, drove a stake to mark the place, and went to help load the wagon. They pulled out of Wind River Pass on the 12th day at first light, with the false floor full and the tarpaulin lashed and the ledger in Marisol's coat, and made 4 miles before they saw the dust. It was coming south, up the road they meant to go down. 2 wagons and outriders. Jonah counted 6 horses, moving at a working pace with a heavy load or heavy gear. Marisol pulled the mules into a sidewash without being told, and they went up on foot to a ledge and lay down and watched them go by below. The lead wagon carried lumber, cans, and coiled rope. The second carried a scraper blade and a plow. They were not coming to look. They were coming to bury the convoy under the wash and burn what would not bury. "That's 4 days early," Marisol said. "That's not early. That's them being told." Jonah's mouth was dry. "Nobody's watched that pass in 3 years, and now they come. Somebody knew there was a stranger in it. Nobody saw us. Somebody saw that you." He looked at her. "You're 9 days late on a run to the Bradshaw camps, and your outfit's known. Somebody asked where Ortega's wagon was." Marisol did not answer. Behind them, in the pass, a man's voice carried up the rock, and then another. They lay on the ledge until the last outrider was passed, and then they went down to the mules, and Jonah made the first bad decision of the return trip. The north road out of the pass ran 11 miles of open ground before it broke into juniper. In daylight, with a canvas-topped wagon, they would be visible for most of it, so they should have waited for dark. But the party below would send a man back to the road for water within a day, and the seep was on the north side, and the seep had fresh work on it, the cribbing of flat rock Jonah had built with his own hands, 8 days old and obvious as a signature. "They'll find the seep," he said. "They'll find the seep, whether we sit here or not. They'll find the seep and the panels." Because he had left them. 19 stripped seat frames, chiseled out clean, stacked under the bench where he had worked, because there had been no room in the wagon and no reason to carry gutted wood across a desert. Marisol closed her eyes for a second. "How long before they climb up there?" "An hour. A day. Depends whether they're thorough." They ran for the juniper in daylight and made it. And for the rest of that day nothing happened. And by evening, Jonah had begun to believe he had panicked. He had not. The following afternoon, 22 miles on, a single rider came up behind them on the road and passed them at a walk. He was a young man in a good coat with a canteen and no visible gear for a long ride, which meant he had come from somewhere near. He touched his hat to Marisol, looked at the wagon bed the way a man looks at a thing he has been told to look at, and went on north at an easy trot. Neither of them spoke for a mile. "He'll be in Kirkland tonight," Marisol said. "And whoever he tells will be on the road tomorrow." The pressure changed after that, and it changed the way Silas had once told him a wheel changes, not by breaking, but by all the small loosenesses arriving at once. They lost time first. The direct road to Prescott ran through Skull Valley and past 2 stage stops where a wagon was noted and remembered. Marisol took them east on a mining track instead, which added a day and a half and climbed hard, and on the climb the offside mule went lame in the near fore. Jonah got the foot up and found a stone bruise, deep, in soft frog. Nothing to cut, nothing to do but poultice and rest. 2 days, Marisol said. "We don't have 2 days. Then we have a dead mule and no days." They rested one and pushed the second on a half load, with Jonah walking and carrying 40 pounds of it on his back, and that night, camped in a stand of scrub oak with no fire, they had the conversation that Jonah would think about for a long time afterward. "There's a way to do this that costs you nothing," Marisol said. "Go on." You've got 162 papers and a manifest. 38 of those are bank drafts. Some of those men are dead. You've got death notations in Beale's book, on 4 of them yourself. A draft's near as good as cash to a bank that doesn't ask, and there are banks that don't ask. She was not looking at him. Take 6. Just the drafts on dead men, that's maybe $800. You walk into Prescott a man with money, and money is the only thing that makes anybody in that town listen to you. Jonah did not answer for a long moment, and the reason he did not answer was that he had already thought it. He had thought it on the 4th day in the pass, holding a draft for $400 made out to an estate, and he had put it in the manifest and written, "Seal intact," and had not mentioned it to anyone, and the shame of having thought it made him harder than he meant to be. Is that what you'd do? I'm telling you what's available. That's not what I asked. Marisol turned her head. In the dark, he could just make out the shape of her. No, she said, but I've got a house in Congress with my sister in it and a mule that might not walk tomorrow, and I've been 9 days late on a paying run for a man I met at a water hole. So I'd like it on the record that I looked at $800 and said, no, because nobody's ever going to write that down for me. I'll write it down. In your condition column? In the ledger. Same as everything else. She laughed, and then she stopped laughing. Jonah, who are we taking these to? And there it was, the question he had been walking away from for 2 weeks. He had an answer, and it was not a good one. His answer was the U.S. Land Office in Prescott, and the Marshal, and if those failed, the newspaper. His answer was to walk into the Capitol with a wagon full of stolen government paper and a manifest in a freighter's hand and trust that somebody in a building would be honest. He said it out loud and heard how it sounded. That's not a plan, Marisol said. That's a hope with a wagon under it. I don't have another. You have 162 of them. They're 3 years scattered. They're names, she said. With counties, you've got 61 pension certificates and 44 land patents, and every one of them says where that person filed. That's not scattered. That's a route. I've hauled every one of those roads. Jonah sat up. That's months. That's what I'm telling you. And he said the thing that he would spend the next week regretting. And it came out of him fast, out of the old place, out of 11 years old on a freight wagon with a note pinned to his coat. Then I'll do it alone. You've got a house and a sister and a lame mule and a route you're going to lose. Take the wagon to Congress. I'll carry what I can. The silence that followed was different from the other silences. All right, Marisol said. They reached the outskirts of Skull Valley the next evening, and the mule was walking sound, and the argument had not been reopened, and Jonah understood that he had done something he did not know how to undo. He also, in the same 2 days, made his second bad decision, which had nothing to do with Marisol, and everything to do with the same flaw wearing a different hat. He decided not to write to Silas. There was a post at Skull Valley. He stood outside it with $3 in his hand, and the letter to Dortch still buttoned in his shirt. And he thought about what a letter would say. There is a convoy in Wind River Pass, and men burying it, and I have the papers. And he thought about the fact that a letter is read by a postmaster's clerk and carried by a company and handled by 6 people. He did not send it. He told himself it was security. Prescott, in the 2nd week of October, was cold at night and full of freight. They came in separately, which was Jonah's idea and the last piece of advice Marisol took from him. She drove the wagon to a yard on Granite Street where she was known and had the false floor emptied into a locked feed room, and Jonah walked in on the Kirkland Road with the manifest copy in his boot and 11 documents in a flat oilcloth against his ribs. A sample, chosen for variety. 3 pensions, 3 patents, 2 drafts, 2 vouchers, and Beale's notebook. He spent 2 days doing what he thought was carefulness and was actually pride. He did not go to the Marshal. He went first to the U.S. Land Office, because land patents were their business, and he stood at a counter and asked to speak to the register. The clerk asked his business. I have documents belonging to this office. From what agent? From no agent. He was made to wait an hour and a half on a bench, and then a man came out. Not the register, a deputy clerk named Wilmer, 40, tired, ink on his cuff, and Jonah showed him one patent. Wilmer's face changed. Where did you get this? Wind River Pass. That's... Wilmer stopped. He looked at the seal and at the plat on the back, and then he looked at Jonah's hands, which were a laborer's hands, and at his boots. Who else knows? And Jonah, because he had spent 2 weeks alone with a secret and had come to believe that holding it tightly was the same as protecting it, said, nobody. He watched Wilmer take that in, and he watched the man decide something, and he did not understand until much later what he had done. He had told a frightened clerk in a compromised office that there was one man, unknown, unbacked, unwitnessed, holding the only proof in the territory. Wilmer told him to come back Thursday with everything. Jonah walked out into the street pleased with himself, which was the worst part. The rest happened over 30 hours. Wednesday morning, a man came to the boarding house on Montezuma Street, where Jonah had a bed, and asked the woman who ran it about a young man with a canvas tool roll. He said he was from the Ormsby yard and had work. Wednesday afternoon, 2 men, polite, in coats, came to the freight yard on Granite Street with a paper. The paper was a writ of attachment, sworn out that morning, alleging that Marisol Ortega had accepted freight consigned to the Southern Overland Company and had failed to deliver it, and demanding the seizure of goods in her possession pending suit. It was, in its way, brilliant, and Jonah understood the shape of it as soon as he heard. They could not accuse her of having stolen mail without admitting mail existed, so they had accused her of a freight default, which is a civil matter heard in a territorial court before a territorial judge, and they had asked the court to take the goods and hold them. Not destroy, hold, in a warehouse, under a bond, for as long as a docket takes. Marisol got word to him through a boy at the yard, and Jonah found her behind the Granite Street stables at dusk, and she was white around the mouth. They didn't take it. What? They served the writ, and the yardman told them the load went out Tuesday to the camps, which is a lie, and he told it because I've hauled his flour for 4 years. She was breathing hard. It's in the feed room, under 100 sacks of barley. And it's got until they come back with a constable. How long? Tomorrow. Maybe the next day. Jonah's mind went to the one place it had always gone, which was to the problem as a mechanical thing. Then we move it tonight. Move it where? Every yard in this town knows my wagon, and half of them owe the Ormsby office money. Marisol's voice cracked on it. And they've got my name on a court paper, Jonah. Do you understand what that is? That's not men in a pass. That's a judge. That's my license to haul. That follows me. I'll go to the marshal. With what? You've got no writ, no employer, no standing, and a wagon full of federal paper that a lawyer can call stolen mail in your hands as easily as in theirs. Then I'll go to Wilmer Thursday, like I said. Wilmer told them. She said it flatly. Or Wilmer told somebody who told them. You walked into a land office on Monday, and a writ came out of a courthouse on Wednesday naming me? And the only way anybody in this town knew my wagon was involved is that a man asked you who else knew, and you told him nobody, so he went and found out. Jonah stood in the alley, with the cold coming down off Thumb Butte. I didn't give them your name. You didn't have to. You gave them a shape. One man, alone, from the Kirkland Road, with wet paper in an oilcloth. There's exactly one outfit that came off the Kirkland Road last week. She pressed the heels of her hands to her eyes. You wanted to hold it by yourself so nobody could lose it, and the only thing you actually did was make yourself the single thing they had to break. That landed in a place nothing had reached in years. Marisol. Don't. She lowered her hands. I'm not leaving. I want you to know that, because you're about to do the thing where you get ahead of it and leave first. I'm not leaving, but I am telling you that you are wrong in a way that is going to cost people who never agreed to it. Thursday came, and Jonah did not go to the land office. He went instead to the Ormsby Yard on Gurley Street at 6 in the morning and stood across the road and watched because he wanted to see the men. He saw teams and feed wagons and a foreman with a tally board, and then at 7 he saw a well-made buggy come in and a heavy man in a gray coat get down and go into the office, and the foreman took his hat off, and Jonah heard him say, "Morning, Mr. Cobb." Cobb, the name in Beale's notebook, the man who had assigned the convoy the Wind River Road. He was not a territorial official, he was a contractor. And a contractor who supplied government teams and forage was a man who saw every schedule, knew every route, and could put a wagon and 6 horses anywhere in the territory without one person asking why. Jonah watched him go inside and felt the whole architecture of it settle into place, and felt, immediately after, the ground go out from under him, because Cobb would not need to burn anything. Cobb had a court paper, a judge, a bond, and a warehouse. All he needed to do was win a delay. Jonah went back to Granite Street at a run. The yard gates were open. There was a constable's horse at the rail and a wagon in the yard with the tailgate down, and men carrying barley sacks out of the feed room and stacking them in the dust in a neat, patient, entirely lawful line. They took it at 11 in the morning, in daylight, with a court order and a receipt. Marisol stood in the yard and signed the receipt because refusing to sign would have been contempt, and Jonah stood at the gate and watched a constable's man count 162 documents into a locked chest, calling out the kinds pension, patent, draft, while a clerk wrote numbers, and there was nothing at all in the procedure that a person could point to and call theft. The chest went into a bonded warehouse on Cortez Street under a territorial seal. The manifest went with it. Marisol's ledger, in her hand, with her name in the front, entered as evidence of receipt, which is to say, entered as proof that she had held goods she could not account for. The suit named her for $1,100. Her hauling license was suspended pending the action, which took 4 minutes and 1 signature. That evening, Jonah sat on the steps behind the boarding house with the oilcloth packet in his lap, 11 documents and a dead clerk's notebook, all he had kept back, all that was left, and understood that he had carried 162 people's proof across 90 miles of desert and handed it, personally and by his own choices, to the men who took it. He did not sleep. He walked out past the last houses and sat on a rock above the road until the cold got into him, and he made himself do the thing he had spent his life not doing, which was to look at his own work honestly. He was good at looking at work. That was the one thing he had. So he laid it out like a wheel on a bench and looked for the failure. It was not the pass. The pass he had done well. The chisel method. The panels. The condition column. The burying of the rigging. It was not the road. The road he had done well too. It was the counter at the land office. Who else knows? Nobody. He had said it with something close to pride. He had said it because being the only one who knew was the same, in the arithmetic he had lived by since he was 11, as being safe. If no one else held it, no one else could drop it. If he needed no one could leave. And what he had actually built, by that arithmetic, was a thing with exactly 1 point of failure, and he had walked it into a room and shown it to a stranger. Silas had told him, "A man can do everything right by himself and still be no use to anybody." He had thought it was about loneliness. It was about engineering. A wheel does not hold because any one spoke is strong. A wheel holds because 32 of them are in compression against each other at every moment, and you can break 4 and drive home. He had built a single-spoke wheel out of himself. And there was worse in it than error, and he made himself say that part too. Marisol had asked him a question. "Who are we taking these to?" And given him the answer in the same breath, and he had heard it as a burden and said, "I'll do it alone." And she had been standing there offering to be counted on, and he had refused her because being owed something by someone is the beginning of being able to lose them. She had been right about the shape. He had made himself the single thing they had to break, and they had not even had to break him. They had simply taken the box. Sometime before dawn, he stopped feeling sorry and started, without quite noticing the change, doing what he had done in the pass on the third day, when the leather cracked and the chisel rolled. He went around it. The papers were in a warehouse under seal, but the people were not. He came down into town at first light and found Marisol at the yard, sitting on the tongue of her own wagon, which she was no longer licensed to drive for pay. "I was wrong at the counter," he said, "and I was wrong in the oak scrub. I know. You said the papers were a route. You were right, and I told you I'd do it alone because I didn't want to owe you." He put the oilcloth on the wagon bed. "I'm asking now, properly. I can't do it, and I know I can't." Marisol looked at the packet. "They've got the manifest. They've got your manifest in your hand with your name in the front and every county and every amount." Jonah crouched and opened the oilcloth. "But they've got it in a warehouse, and they think that's the end of it, because they think it's paper. It is paper. It's a list of 61 widows and 44 homesteads, and it's the only list in the territory that says exactly where every one of them lives." He looked up. "You wrote it. Can you write it again?" It took her 4 days. They did it in the back of the feed room at Granite Street, with the door open and nothing to hide, because there was nothing left to hide, a woman writing in a ledger and a man reading names off a copy in a boot. Jonah's boot copy was incomplete. He had made it in the pass out of caution, and caution had made it thin, names, counties, and kinds, but no amounts and no seal notations. Marisol filled the rest from memory and from her own habits, because a freighter who has written a manifest can generally rebuild it, and because she had written Eulalia Sanborn, widow, Yavapai, with her own hand, and had said out loud at the time that she knew the road. They got back 141 of the 162. The 21 they could not reconstruct. They listed as gaps, honestly, in a separate column, because Jonah insisted and Marisol agreed that a list with holes in it that admits the holes is worth more than a full one that lies. Then they gathered the rest, and the gathering took 11 days more, and it used everything either of them had. Marisol had the roads. She had hauled to Kirkland, Skull Valley, Peoples Valley, Walnut Grove, and the Bradshaw camps for 9 years, and she knew which store kept the mail for which valley and which stage stop had a bulletin board and who at each of them could read. She did not have a license, so she could not haul for pay, which meant she could not haul at all without a suit for contempt. She could ride. She rode. Jonah had the letters, and the letters were the thing he had learned in the pass without knowing he was learning it, that a document's worth lies in its provenance, and that condition, honestly recorded, is what turns an object into evidence. So each letter said the same 4 things. A pension certificate in your name was sewn into the seat of a mail coach in Wind River Pass. It was removed on this date by this man, recorded in this manifest, and it is now held under territorial seal in the bonded warehouse on Cortez Street, Prescott, in a suit against Marisol Ortega. If you want it, come and say so, and bring your discharge or your receipt or anything else with your name on it. They wrote 141 of them. Jonah's hand was slow and square, and he wrote until his fingers cramped, and Marisol wrote faster and in 2 languages, and the boy from the yard, whose name was Tomas, and who was 14 and had lied about the load on Tuesday, addressed the envelopes. Postage was 2 cents a letter. It was $2.82. Jonah had $31 left of his 41. They did not mail them through the Prescott post office. That was Marisol's judgment, and it was correct. 141 letters posted at one window in one morning is a fact that a postmaster remembers and mentions. So she rode them out in bundles and posted them from Kirkland, Skull Valley, Walnut Grove, and Wickenburg over 4 days, 20 and 30 at a time. And where she could, she did not post them at all, but handed them to storekeepers who knew her. Jonah, meanwhile, did the other half. He went to the U.S. Marshal's office, not the land office, and not with everything. He brought Beale's notebook and nothing else. He had thought hard about this, and he had thought about it correctly, which was a change. The notebook was not evidence of a theft, because Beale had never seen one. It was a dead man's record of irregular routing instructions, resealed pouches, and one contractor's name. It was worth very little on its own. And that was precisely why he could give it away. The deputy marshal was a man named Hollis, 50, careful, who had been in the territory 9 years and had the look of someone who had learned to be slow on purpose. "Why are you bringing me this, and not the papers?" "Because you'd have to hold the papers, and they're already held, and I'd rather you were free to be curious than obliged to be a custodian." Hollis looked at him for a while. "Who else has seen this book?" And Jonah, who 11 days earlier had answered that question with the worst word in the English language, said, "Marisol Ortega, who found it with me, Tomas Guzman at the Granite Street yard, who copied a page, a clerk in the Kirkland store who read one entry out loud to me because my eyes were bad in that light. And in about 6 days, roughly 100 people in 4 counties who are going to know the name Ormsby because I put it in a letter." Hollis put the notebook down. "You've made yourself hard to disappear." "I've made it not matter whether I disappear," Jonah said. "That's different, and it took me longer than it should have." The hearing on the attachment suit was set for the 14th of November before Judge Rensselaer at the Territorial Courthouse, and Cobb's counsel asked for and received a continuance to January on the grounds of an absent witness, which was the whole strategy laid bare, not to win but to hold, until the pass was buried and the seals were old and everyone had stopped caring. The continuance was granted on the 14th at 10 in the morning. By 11, there were 19 people standing in the corridor outside the courtroom. They had come in on their own, which was the point. An old man from Skull Valley with a discharge paper in a tin, 2 brothers from Walnut Grove with a land office receipt for a quarter section their father had filed on in 69 and been told in 73 was unpatented. A woman from Kirkland named Eulalia Sanborn, 62, who had ridden in a neighbor's wagon and who had brought her husband's discharge, her marriage record, and a letter from the Bureau of Pensions dated 4 months after the convoy vanished, informing her that her certificate had never been issued. That last document was the one that mattered, and none of them knew it yet. By the 17th, there were 40-some. By the 20th, 60. They came in over 2 weeks, the way people come to a territorial capital in November, slowly, by wagon and by borrowed horse, and they slept in the Methodist Church and in Marisol's sister's house in Congress and in the yard at Granite Street, where Tomas's mother fed them beans in shifts. Hollis, who was curious and now free to be, spent those 2 weeks doing the thing a deputy marshal can do that a stranger cannot, he wrote to Yuma. Cobb's counsel moved on the 22nd to have the attachment made permanent and the goods sold, which was a routine motion, and which was where the plan nearly died. The final complication came from the honest direction, which is where they always come from. Judge Rensselaer, who was not corrupt and never had been, ruled that the corridor full of claimants was not properly before his court. He was right. It was a civil suit over a freight consignment between 2 parties. 60 strangers with discharge papers had no standing in it, and letting them speak would be reversible error, and he said so from the bench with something like regret. "Whatever these documents are," he said, "the question before me is whether Mrs. Ortega accepted a consignment and failed to deliver it. If she did, the goods are attached. If she did not, they are returned to whoever proves title. Nobody in that corridor has shown me title to anything." Which meant the box would stay sealed, and the suit would run to January, and Marisol would lose her license and $1,100 she did not have. Jonah sat in the back of that courtroom and felt the old pull, and it was very strong. The old pull said, Give them the 11. He still had the sample packet, 3 pensions, 3 patents, 2 drafts, 2 vouchers. He could stand up right now, walk to the bench, and put 11 documents in front of a judge, and it would be dramatic, and it would be immediate, and it would be entirely his own. And it would be, legally, a man in a corridor with property he could not prove title to, which is exactly what Rensselaer had just finished explaining did not work. He looked at the 11 and understood, finally and all the way down, that he had been carrying them for the same reason he had said at the counter. He had kept them back, because keeping something back was how he had survived being 11 years old. They were not a reserve, they were a habit. So he did the thing his earlier self would not have done. He gave them away, not to the court, and not to the marshal, but to the people they belonged to. He and Marisol and Tomas spent the afternoon of the 22nd finding, out of 60-some claimants in a church basement, the 8 who matched documents in the oilcloth. It took 4 hours and a lot of squinting at names. Eulalia Sanborn was one of them, and Eulalia Sanborn, holding her own pension certificate in her hand and her bureau letter in the other, was no longer a stranger in a corridor. She was a person with title. She filed her own petition on the 24th, a simple one, drawn by a young lawyer named Feeney, who took 8 cases for what the church could raise, which was $31, which was every cent Jonah had left. She asked the court to release into her custody one certificate, held under seal, which the Bureau of Pensions had never issued and which therefore could not lawfully be part of any freight consignment to anyone. That was the wedge, not the theft, the arithmetic. Because if the Bureau had never issued it, and it was in that box, then somebody had taken it out of the federal mail, and no territorial attachment suit over a freight default could touch federal mail, and no territorial judge would want to be the man who tried. Rensselaer opened the box on the 26th to determine what was in it, which was all Jonah had ever needed anyone to do. The count came to 162, and Marisol's ledger was in the box with it, in her hand, dated, with the condition column. And when the second count was set beside the reconstructed list, 141 names, 21 honest gaps, written by the same woman 11 days later without access to the first, the two agreed on every name they shared. Hollis's letters from Yuma came back in the second week of December, the routing wires from the summer of '73, signed for a territorial office by a clerk who had been dead a year, and the forage and team contracts putting Ormsby & Co. stock on the Wind River Road in September. It went federal on the 11th of January. It took 2 more years. That is how those things go. The shop was 2 walls of adobe and 2 of plank, on a lot behind the Granite Street yard, and Jonah Pike had the wheel up in slings and the light coming through the gaps. He was driving a spoke home with the flat of his palm, because a mallet leaves marks. Marisol's suit had been dismissed in March, and her license restored in May, and she was outside now with the mules, hauling again, and the $1,100 had never been paid by anyone, and had simply, in the way of these things, stopped existing. 51 certificates had reached the people named on them, 19 had not, because the people were dead, and their estates were still arguing. 9 patents were still in Washington. Jonah had a list, and he worked on it Sundays. Tomas Guzman was 16 now, and crouched on the other side of the wheel with a spoke shave, taking too much off. "You're pushing it," Jonah said. "It's slow. It's slow because you're doing it right, and it's going to be slow for about 2 years. He turned the wheel a quarter and set it. "Come here. Put your thumb where mine is." The boy shifted over and put his thumb on the fellow. "Feel that? That's all 32 of them holding at once. So none of them could do it.